Hello, everyone. Welcome to Thin Vertical Slices. Thin Vertical Slices is a part of Agile theory. All this stuff relates to project and product management. It is technology agnostic. A lot of Thin Vertical Slice work is done by plenty of people that have never written a line of code in their lives. So this is more zoomed back a level from that. And getting into features and how we decompose a product into features. So let's get some vocab down first. All right, so a thin vertical slice could also be called a story. Could also be called a feature. All three of these are effectively the same thing. The reason we say thin vertical slice is of how evocative it is of what we're trying to accomplish with story and feature. So if we have a slice of cake, it's got these layers in it. Then we could say that one of those layers might be your database and the schema and any of the things that go along with that. Backend infrastructure could probably be one of these also. Front end, interaction design, all that kind of stuff. So we can think of these as layers of the cake. So what we want to do is make a very thin vertical slice of this. We don't want all of the database and schema for the entire product. We don't want all the back end. We don't want just the front end. We want all of those things, just enough of them to get something useful done. That's what a thin vertical slice is. Ask me some questions about that.
So like if we're talking about like a database, like the database portion of that thin vertical slice, maybe it'll just be like the initial model. Maybe you have plans to add like extra attributes later, but that would be like later on. That's like an add column for later for another slice.
Exactly. For your first thin vertical slice, chances are your database table, you have one of them. That's fine. And like you're kind of alluding to, it might not even have all of the columns on it that it may eventually have. Completely fine. It just needs enough to get that one feature done.
Hey, Kyle.
Yeah.
Would a skeleton, building out a skeleton, be a good analogy for this?
Maybe. Expand.
So just like building out a skeleton, like almost like a template, where you just got the core building blocks of your program, or whether even if it's like a PowerPoint page, right? You got, title and then graph, and then you just kind of come back to it and further expand on it.
No, this is the opposite of that. So instead, what we're doing is having an actual computer application that only does one thing, rather than like an outline or like a sketch of what all of it might eventually be. We have one thing that's completely done. Other questions about thin vertical slices? Cool. So now I have a question for you. Why doesn't everybody do this? How come, despite preaching this over and over and over again, I still have capstone students who are like, my schema's done. I got my whole schema done. Now all I got to do is tack on the back end. My whole API is ready to go. I just got to wire it up to the front end. How come I still have that argument 5 times a week? What's the natural inclination toward horizontal slicing?
They just want to build the cake from layer to layer instead of from slice to slice, I guess.
Absolutely. Why?
In a mind frame, like say you're working on your back end stuff and you just get in that frame of mind and that's what you're doing. Or on the other hand, you're working on your front end, you're all creative, and that's just where your focus is, and it's hard to kind of switch back and forth between the two sometimes.
Totally. Great insight, Lynn. So we're like laser focused in on something, we get in the flow state and we don't want to stop. Okay, what's the value of interrupting the flow state then? Why would we want to do that?
Your app is always finished, even if it doesn't have all the features you want.
Ding, 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 ding. When you have a complete cake slice here, that is working software. That's finished. And then you add another slice. And another slice, and another slice, and another slice. And at some point you run out of time to add more slices. What we don't have is like, oh my God, but the thing is too, and all I have is frosting. You set up with a smaller cake. That's completely fine. And so if you're doing this with your projects, you get a feature on Monday. You get 2 features on Tuesday. And it starts getting a little bit tricky. You get one on Wednesday. You get half of one on Thursday. Doesn't quite work out. So on Friday, you scrap it. And you have an app with 4 features. Cool. Like, that is so much better than like, well, I have an API working, but it's not wired up to anything. That's what we're going for.
So would the foundation / kind of like the wire structuring, would that be considered like not together, but like separately? Would those be considered thin vertical slices themselves or no?
No. So the thin vertical slice is a complete done version of everything, but just enough to get one thing that a user thinks is cool finished.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
And that's another important takeaway from about this. A thin vertical slice is thin from a user's perspective, not a technologist perspective. This is like the thing that even experienced people fuck up all the time. There's not like a thin vertical slice of database functionality. Like, that doesn't make any sense. This is whoever is using your app, what would they consider new functionality to be? So if you have a database and you swap it out for another database, from your user's perspective, you didn't change anything. And like, I worked at companies where they have stories that are shit like, as a database, I want to go faster so that I'm less sad. And like, that's doesn't mean anything. Now, you could say, as a user, I want search to take less than 3 seconds so that I don't bounce and go to a different website. That's totally valid. And the way that you do that might be swapping out something in one of these layers. Your features might not involve every part of this, but the important thing is that whoever is the user of your software perceives that something new and valuable exists. And to Lynn's point, when you're done, you're done. And I'll give you a real good example of where this comes in handy. So let's say you're me and you're working on this site and you have 3 more instructors on staff, so you have time to do such a thing. And then all of a sudden you have 3 less instructors on staff, and you have all kinds of things that you still want to be able to do with this, but you don't get a chance to work on them for kind of a long time. So you just walk away. That's it. Done. I still have, let's see, projects. So like I'm still working on being able to delete videos, being able to manage users. Like those are thin vertical slices. This one is like, all right, can we have all the users that have instructor accounts and stuff for this thing? You see them, change their password, delete them, that kind of stuff. That's a thin vertical slice. Right now with videos, here's what we can do. Like another one that's going to have to come up real soon is making this load faster. So this is the instructor view for this. I can add a video. That was a thin vertical slice. I can remove a tag. Oops, I can. It's probably waking up the backend right now. Should have done that. Maybe. There it is. It's gone. I can add it back. Ta-da. So like each of those were thin vertical slices too. Being able to add and remove tags. Being able to see hard-coded tags, that was a thin vertical slice. I think being able to click on this and then have the player show up in there, that was a thin vertical slice, pretty sure. But each one of those is like you as users or an instructor as a user goes, cool, I can do a new thing now. Those are thin vertical slices. And so like that brings up a good point. What's thin? Way less than you think it is. So like in this one card here, there was like 4 features. Being able to see tags, being able to add a tag, being able to remove a tag. That's 3 different features. Being able to click the poster and have the thing play. That's a feature. Some of those required like back-end stuff. Like I had to make new tables for tags and that kind of stuff. Some of them, like this one, just some front-end code. But from the user's perspective, each one of those is a complete feature. And when I get pulled off of this for a year, it's fine. The user doesn't see a whole bunch of like garage sale shit half broken around the app. Ask me some more questions.
So you were kind of saying that with like on the database end, like it kind of goes against thin vertical slices a little bit. Would that be, or maybe that's not the right way to word it, but like I forgot exactly what you said, but like wouldn't that be kind of like if you were like pulling off of an API? It's kind of hard to do that in like a thin vertical slice because you want like this huge breadth of information.
It can be a lot of information, but like figure out how you can make that smaller. Okay, so you get a ton of information back. Do I have to display all of it? What's the smallest amount of work that I can do that's useful to a user?
It's like maybe for now it's just pulling the names out.
Sure.
And like displaying the names, and then it's pulling out, you know, like, I don't know, like ages or locations or.
Sure. If like there's, if each of those displays in kind of an interesting way that like requires some work, if just having a name would be useful by itself, then yeah, those can absolutely be thin vertical slices. For example, there was like an idea at one point to like have the person that was like teaching a lesson or something as like a field on here. That would be useful. Adding that would be a thin vertical slice. It's also plenty valuable without that, so we'll do it.
So kind of curious, is one of the other points of a thin vertical slice is the ability to either, not obviously to create something, a new feature, but would it also make it easier to remove that feature, like kind of like a build-a-block?
Yes, absolutely. Makes it easy to remove, also makes it easy to reprioritize. One of the things that people inevitably do when they're working in fat horizontal slices is, okay, cool, I got my whole schema for my whole project. Neat. And then you work on it for 2 days. You're like, oh, I did that wrong. I really worked myself into a corner on that one. We're trying to avoid that because now you need to rework all of that stuff. And that starts getting real like slapdash cables everywhere. The black and white angry scene of an infomercial very quickly. So if we're only doing things that are useful for like the exact feature that we're working on right now, we don't get the efficiency of having all that schema work done. But also, we're not going to have to do the inevitable rework because we got it wrong. And as circumstances change, we can reprioritize what the next thing is. A good example, at one point, user management was like a pretty high priority on that site. We wanted students to be able to log in also, and like we wanted upvote and downvote. We wanted like a few of those things. Right now, how slow the videos are loading is like become the biggest problem because we have so many fucking videos on that page now. And that was not the case when we were talking about this last time. Not a problem. We just shift priorities. So like the Trello board for this, which has not been used in a very long time, but let's see. Oh, this is with Flatiron School. Ah, shit. I don't think I think it's on my other email address. That has all the thin vertical slices on it. And they're just cards, and you can reorder and resequence them because circumstances change. What the next most important thing is a moving target. But if they're all like encapsulated things, we don't have work that depends on work that depends on work that depends on work quite so much.
So it's good practice to make your thin vertical slices be as independent as possible, not like only required, like the tiny things that are required to work together, but everything else be as individual as possible.
Yes. Story invest. What is the I in invest? Independent. Other questions about how this works in principle? All right, I'm going to give you one more tool, and then I want you to wrestle with this idea a little bit. So one of the things that gets difficult is finding where those seams are. So we'll call this ideas for splitting. Because sometimes you can figure out what the feature is, but it's not thin. It's big. It's 4 days of work, something like that. So sometimes it can be hard to wrestle that into valuable, smaller pieces. One idea is to split on CRUD. Create, read, update, delete, list. Lots of things lend themselves to those being 5 different stories. And I'll usually go, cool, can I list things? It's usually where I start. Priority-wise, if you can see a bunch of shit, I can always go into the database and manually delete stuff and manually add stuff. It's not as useful as like a user being able to do that, but it's some useful. All right, so I've got that. Then can we add stuff? Pretty easy to just delete records out of a database manually if we need to. But if we can list things and a user can create things, that's all right. And then like, probably add like delete next. So, because like instead of updating things, if I can delete them and add them again, it kind of accomplishes the same thing. It's a little janky, but accomplishes effectively the same thing. And then updating and then reading usually. That's one way that we can break down a big thing into some smaller things. Another way to do some splits are split on one versus others. I specifically didn't use one versus many, even though it's kind of the same thing, because it has no relationship with like the idea in databases or something. So like the classic example is, I want to be able to take a bunch of different kinds of credit cards. And the problem is that like taking the first credit card, that's where a lot of the work is. Once you have that, adding the rest of them, like those aren't meaningful. They're hard to size separately. And so you say, I want to be able to take one credit card and I want to be able to take multiple credit cards. Like those are your two thin vertical slices for that. Other ideas for splitting. Hard-coded versus dynamic. I think this is a good development practice in general, but like in certain circumstances, it can be a pretty good story split point also. So like in an earlier version of the Flatiron site, with these things, this wasn't being read out of a database. There's no API for it. It was literally just some HTML where I had like written all of these things out. So like you could say that's a story, that's listing. And then once we start wanting to do these other things, that's where the benefits of the dynamism come in. So we go, okay, well now I need to be able to make this dynamic. Can I keep these things showing up on the page, but now I read them out of a database? Now, the thing you have to be careful about on that is that if from the user's perspective, it's the exact same thing, it's not a new story. So a lot of times how this works is I have a hard-coded list, and then once you're doing create or something like that, that generates the need for it to be dynamic. And so it's also listing dynamic, and you can add things. But that, like this could be really good for figuring out how something should be presented without also doing all of the work of making that dynamic also. So, and there's a lot of others. In fact, there's an entire thing that was made by my Agile coach, Richard Lawrence. It's Agile for All story splitting. This is their famous diagram. So like, this is an entire discipline. We can go pretty deep into this, but this is an all right place to start. All right, ask me some questions before we start getting dirty.
What is kind of like I know that I'm sure that link or resource that you just mentioned would probably elaborate on it, but what's a good rule of thumb on whether to do something dynamic or hard code? Is it okay to do like hard coding for like the beginning to test it out? Or is it just best to start dynamic and then move to hard code if need be?
I'll pretty much always start hard coded. So if you watch any of my like make a web app kinds of videos, I'll write out all of the HTML with the values hard coded in it first and get that working. And then like my cleanup work is then like adding an API to that and then adding a database to that. Because one of the reasons that's useful is the same reason that like we want to go with const and then loosen up to let if we need to, rather than the other way around. Is if I have this working right up front, then I know exactly when it breaks. All right, cool. So now I'm reading this out of local objects and arrays. Okay, well that didn't work, so maybe I structured that wrong. All right, now I'm reading it out of remote objects and arrays. I'm like fetching from a backend or something like that. oh, that didn't work. So obviously the thing that broke was in the network request. So it's a way of like making your troubleshooting, like, it doesn't stop you from having errors or problems. It just highlights exactly where those are in like a very stepwise kind of way. So there are also problems where you could reasonably split those into two different stories. Like that example from the Firebase site, I think is a pretty good one. I've done this 3 times at like different places now, and I always start with it hard-coded, and sometimes it just sits that way for months. The curriculum doesn't change often enough to justify making that dynamic. It's only when I need Damon and Christine and Ahmed and John to be able to work with this stuff also, that everybody going into the code every time starts getting fucking messy. So I need to be able to have them add stuff, so that necessitates making all that dynamic. So that makes those 2 different stories. There's other stuff where like those steps are small enough that going from static to dynamic is all of like 3 hours of work. So fuck it, make it the same feature. But like a story, a thin vertical slice should be on the order of like less than a day, day and a half. That's kind of like the realm we're talking about with size on this. When you get really good at this, like 4 or 5 thin vertical slices a day, that's about right. Other questions about splitting, any of these kinds of things? Cool. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to take, let's do 6 minutes. 6 minutes on your own, and then I'm going to put you in groups. I want you to come up with all the thin vertical slices you could think of for Twitter, as it is right now. See if you can break Twitter down into the thinnest, most vertical slices you can. If you want a format for those, the canonical one is as a I want so that you don't have to use this format if you don't want to, but if it's helpful. Who is it? Is it somebody reading? Is it somebody using it? Is it somebody administering it? Whose perspective is it from? What is the like thing that they wish existed in the world, and why? If that's helpful, use it. If it's not, do whatever you want. Figure out what some thin vertical slices are for Twitter. 6 minutes, go.
Are we slacking these to you, or we're just writing them down and going to talk about them?
Yeah, just keep track of them because you're going to talk about them in groups also. Another 3 minutes. Another minute. All right, so I'm going to split you into groups. I want you to discuss what you came up with. See what you agree on, see what you don't agree on, see what you missed, see what everybody picked up on right away. Chat about it a little bit. 15 participants into 5 rooms. And go for it. Johnny, you get your link?
I don't see one. Let me see.
Should have invited you to join breakout room 4.
I did not get a link. Is it in the chat?
And it's not in chat. It should be in your Zoom interface somewhere.
I did not get one, but I do see join breakout room on the bottom.
That's it.
That's not working for me.
Uh-oh. Did anything pop up on your screen just now? There he